It's the internet. You're busy. Let's do this. Mike, I'm scared because I haven't played many of these games, so I'm gonna yell random stuff at you the whole time.
Good, good.
Uh,
Yeah, we're doing Final Fantasy tier list today.
I don't hate Final Fantasy. I just don't enjoy playing them. And that's not like I've enjoyed a few here and there. Final Fantasy Tactics is fantastic. So should we start with that one, Mike?
Not even on this. That's not even
So
on this
not
list.
even
Yeah.
not even
Before
on this.
everybody turns this off, I want to assure them that I am very familiar with Final Fantasy and I like it a lot, and I am qualified to rank these games. I don't understand you because you love Mario RPG.
Yes, I do.
So, and that was the gateway, I feel like, for a lot of people to get into Final Fantasy, but you just never made
Let me
that
explain
transition.
the difference. Mario RPG is fun.
Oh, come on.
Okay, I'm not going to be a troll like this the whole time. And I do want to say that when I saw the title for each tiers, I did laugh out loud because I understand that much. This is very good work here, Mike, that you've done. Do you want to explain that before we start getting into the meat and potatoes?
Yeah, we have 5 tiers here. On the bottom, we have tier. Then we have Tira, Tiraga, Tiraja, and then named after the spell that did kill Donald Duck when he used it, Zeta tier.
I really should. I would like if everything in these games was as stupid as that. I would really be into it. And I love suplexing trains, so we'll talk about that when we get there too. Okay. I'll do my best. I'll ask questions, but I'm gonna let you take charge here. So, Mike, let's start. We're gonna go in order. Final Fantasy.
This is just the numbered ones. No major spinoffs like Tactics or Crystal Chronicles, and none of the direct sequels like Final Fantasy X-2 or Final Fantasy IV: The After Years. None of that. Just the things with a number on them.
I was listening to the recent Waypoint Radio, and Patrick Klepek made an offhanded comment about, is this just like that argument about what's a core Mario? So he's not happy with us, Mike. So these are the core Final Fantasy games, though, right? So
yes, this is come on. They have the numbers. These are super core, and like, look, I understand. There maybe X-2 and Lightning Returns are core Final Fantasy games, but we can call this a super definition of it. Part of it is because I just haven't played those ones really. I never got into those. I don't know.
Okay, well, all right. I was gonna say, are you gonna consider those games at all when you get to those games to get to like the like Final Fantasy X? Would you consider it as a whole series? But no, you haven't really played those games. So
yeah, I'll talk about if I play them. I'll talk about them a little bit when we get there. Sure.
Final Fantasy I, Mike. Where does this go?
Yeah, it's always difficult when we do these big legacy series and you get to the first game.
Yep.
So I played the Game Boy Advance version of this. It was that package that had 1 and 2. I think it was called Dawn of Souls or something like that. Final Fantasy 1 is still fun. It's a very good, like, simple, basic RPG, but it's interesting because you can make your whole party in the beginning and you can kind of do what you want there. Like, you can have a party of 4 red mages if you want. You can try to make a very balanced party with warrior, black mage, white mage, monk, or something like that. And, it's classic open overworld, walking around, doing dungeons. It's good stuff. It's not like super innovative because it, comes after Dragon Quest. So it's not like this is some crazy super revolutionary thing. Although I think in America, this was a lot of people's introduction to the genre.
An NES game, right? Like, so and you were recently playing the Dragon Quest games, so can I ask you, like, let's do a little bit of a cross, verses here. Where does this compare to like the Dragon Quest games?
Well, I haven't played Dragon Quest 1 or 2 yet, but I played Dragon Quest 3, and Dragon Quest 3 is better than any of the 3 NES Final Fantasy games. So
okay. I think that's a good, like, I think that's a good measure. Like, I know you really liked Final Fantasy, or I'm sorry, Dragon Quest 3 when you played it. So all these games kind of coming in underneath that. It makes sense, but that's just kind of where these games were at that time, where they were still figuring out how to grow beyond trying to take the tabletop RPG game and turn it into a video game. And they worked and they got a lot of fans, but they definitely got better, right?
Right. But I think by most accounts, Final Fantasy 1 is better than Dragon Quest 1 and Dragon Quest 2, really. Mm-hmm. So, it's probably Tiraga. It's probably right in the middle. It's a very good game. It's an important game. It still holds up. Final Fantasy 2, that's a little harder. People love to dump on this one. think the vast majority of people would be like, this is the worst Final Fantasy. I don't necessarily feel that strongly against it. I think it does some things noticeably better than Final Fantasy One. That there's actually a bit of a story here. Like Final Fantasy One is, something. Go get some crystals. There's some weird time traveling thing. There's not a whole lot going on, which you would expect for an 8-bit RPG. But Final Fantasy Two actually has a kind of fun evil empire rebels plot. It's like one of the first Final Fantasy games that just is heavily taking stuff from Star Wars, which happens a lot in the franchise.
Mhm.
You actually have named characters. You have a lot of guest characters, which is interesting. What people don't like about two is the weird leveling up system where you just level up individual attributes like your strength or magic by using them. And it
Hmm.
becomes kind of easy to exploit because you can just get into a random battle with some weak enemy and start damaging your own party members and healing your own party members and just kind of keep doing that until you raise up all your stats. So it's a little bit funky there. So I mean, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, yeah. So, these games at this time definitely have to try different systems, and they are still figuring those things out. I guess how do you weigh that versus stuff like story and characters for the Final Fantasy series?
I mean, story and characters is really important. It's harder with these early ones because it's they're limited in what they can do or what people even expected back then, right?
Hmm.
And again, I played the Game Boy Advance version of this, so it was probably improved there anyway. Also, I mean, it's weird. A lot of these games, there's so many remakes and stuff. There's so many
Right.
different
Yeah.
versions of it.
I mean,
Yeah, I
honestly,
mean,
at
it's
this point,
still
more people have probably played it on different systems than the NES than played it on the NES. It
yeah,
seems like. Yeah.
right. I know. I think everyone's favorite version of this was actually on PSP, which looks really nice and crisp.
Mm.
I mean, it's probably still one of the worst ones. I just don't feel as strongly about that as some people.
It sounds
So
like
I don't know if I'm like
Tira to me.
it might be Tira. Let's put it in Tira. That might be controversial, and then later maybe I'll bump it down
Yeah, there you go.
if Tira is really low. Final Fantasy 3, however, I this was the one I had the least fun playing. Probably I played the DS remake. So they did some things like they added to the story, they gave the characters actual names, but it was just all kind of fluff, and most of that only happened in like the first like 2 hours of the game anyway. So then it basically just became a pure dungeon crawler almost. This is the first one with like a full-on job system, which is fun, but there's not a lot of depth to it. I don't know. I just didn't enjoy this one that much. I played through the whole thing. Just not one of my favorites. I probably put this in tier. I
Uh,
think Final Fantasy 5 is going to come along and just do everything this tries to do so much better that it's pretty much obsolete.
yeah. So put it in tier. I mean, and Final Fantasy 2 and Final Fantasy 3, these didn't even come out to the United States, which explains why, at the time, which explains why you wouldn't have played it on the NES when you were a kid, right?
Right.
So like, already the Square Enix is maybe making judgments on the series. It feels like to me. I guess maybe there's other indications that I don't know why they didn't decided not to release it in the United States, but or outside of Japan. But my assumption there would be, they were playing to their audience at home and they knew it was popular there and they could get away with it. And when it wasn't quite as good, maybe they're like, we won't
Maybe
spend that effort.
I don't know. Like I think there were plans to release two at some point, and it just didn't happen. Some of it was just localization was so hard for them back
That's
then
true.
that I think they literally couldn't keep up with it. And by the time they were ready to localize a new one, I was like, well, now four's coming out. Why don't we just localize that, which is like probably going to be more interesting because it's on newer hardware.
But
I
4 is
think
like really well regarded too. I thought so. That's where I'm like kind of putting stuff
yeah,
together in my brain here a
and
little bit.
that's what's going to be interesting about me with four because that's probably my most controversial take. Is I'm not a huge
Ooh.
fan of four. I think four
But doesn't
is
it have the job
fine.
system?
No, that's five.
That's
Four
5.
does not.
Okay. So
Four.
maybe I am thinking of 5.
No, four is people like four more. People love four,
Okay.
and four is the one that's the first one that's really a bit more story driven and character driven, which is nice. The story is just wasn't doing a whole lot for me. I played most of these games, I should say, in a kind of a marathon about the time Final Fantasy 3 came out on the DS, because after that, all the numbered games to that point, which was through 12, were easily available for the first time in the US. So I went through and played them all. And the only one I did play as a kid, a good amount, was 6. I think that hurts my appreciation of 4 because 4 is just kind of a worse 6. It doesn't look as good. I don't even like the music as much.
And
the
this is the
characters.
first Super Nintendo game,
It's the first 16-bit one. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I don't know. It never did a whole lot for me. I'd put it in tier. I give it, I give it some respect. It does a good job of being a basic Final Fantasy game, but it is a basic Final
Hmm.
Fantasy game. It introduces the active time battle system, which is great, but then we have like, 7 or something or 5 more whatever games with that are better. Probably my least favorite of the active time battle Final Fantasies actually. I don't quite get why this one is as beloved as it is, especially compared to some of the much better ones, like Final Fantasy V, which I love. Final
Hmm.
Fantasy V,
I've heard a lot of
and
good things about this one too, though. Definitely, I know there are a lot of
yeah,
people who love Final Fantasy V.
and just like before, actually, I played this on Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Advance version. This one is great. It has the really good version of the job system where you're leveling up your jobs along with your character, and when you master a job, you can kind of use some of those abilities on what other job you want to use in the future. So like if you master the red mage, you get that dual cast ability. So now if you're another kind of mage, like a geomancer or whatever, you can double cast spells and stuff like that. Really fun. It's funny because everyone's like, well, Final Fantasy V doesn't focus as much on story as 4 or 6, and to me, its story is still probably better than 4's. It's fun. There's kind of a two-world thing. There's some neat characters. There's the one. It does have like the most generic female party member ever, who's literally just the princess, and
Hmm.
that's a bit of a bummer. But Galuf is great. Bartz's Japanese name is Butts, and you have to like that.
I
You have
do.
Gilgamesh here, which is one of the best Final Fantasy characters. He's super fun. Very good soundtrack. But yeah, just this is like one of my favorite in terms of just like a almost combat and progression focused Final Fantasy. I love just going around, getting into battles, and messing around with the job system in this one. It was super fun to me. Ah, man, I'm almost tempted to make it Zeta tier. I really like Final Fantasy V. I think I'm going to for now. Maybe I'll change my
Yeah,
mind, but
I think this is a game that could kill Donald Duck. So yeah, I'm all
yeah,
for it.
it can kill Donald Duck.
All right. So I think this is one of the breakout games. There's like multiple points along the line where these games break out, but this is one of the breakout games for Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VI. Uh, how do you feel about it, Mike?
I love Final Fantasy VI. I played this one actually as a kid. I think we just rented it a bunch,
Hmm.
and we would always like pretty much get to the opera house, and that blew me away as a kid. There was nothing I had ever seen in a game that was remotely as
Yeah.
cinematic as that opera house sequence. That was insane to me, and I wasn't used to like that much character and story in these games. All these fun little touches, like the first time when Terra uses magic in a random battle when she's with some of these other characters, they actually like freak out and a cutscene plays in like the battle menu about how
Yep.
they're surprised you can use magic, and that's just so great. Kefka is such a fun villain. I really don't have much bad to say about it. You have that amazing twist halfway through where the world gets kind of destroyed, and that's
I
really great. The
I
amazing
have
final
played this
boss.
one. This is one of the games that I've played most of it. I never beat it, but I got most of the way through it. And yeah, all that stuff you touched on, I really did like. I think it felt really creative. There was
Yes.
they never like held themselves back, and if they were like, well, yeah, I mean, what's the best way to tell this story, they would come up with that. And if it was an opera, like an opera scene where someone was singing and you had to play along, they did that. If it was if it was like, we're just gonna have you fight a train, that's really great too.
There's
But
so
I
many
mean,
memorable moments.
yeah, and like have the thing come break out into during the battle sequence. It's just, yeah, they were like, why wouldn't we just do it now? Wouldn't that make sense for the characters to respond immediately? So it felt like them coming into their own and really figuring out what a Final Fantasy game could be, which I guess is impressive because it was kind of like the last in the 2D ones, and they kept just changing things up going forward. For me, like not finishing it was I ran out of steam. I don't know if it ends super strong, but I guess I
It
think
ends
that
pretty strong. It
okay.
ends
So that
pretty
meant
great.
I could have just got distracted. I was a teenager when I finally played it.
Yeah,
So
I mean, before the ending, there is this really cool part where you're kind of reassembling your party, and it's great, but it can be a bit long, I guess, relatively long. Like all of these Final Fantasy games at this point are not longer than 30 hours, which
right.
is compared to some pretty nice. So yeah, it's Zeta tier. There's not.
Hmm.
There's small complaints maybe you can make in here. My biggest issue is just that like there isn't a definitive version of this to play. Which
Yeah.
the same thing with 5. It drives me absolutely crazy. Whenever I see a picture of that PC or mobile version, I get like literally
I mean,
angry.
it's using a
It
terrible
infuriates
filter.
me.
It's a really bad
The
filter that
filter,
you're.
but it wasn't just that. They put in so much work to replace the assets. Like it's a remake, and they put in all that work to make it noticeably worse,
Mhm.
and it just bugs me. It bugs me so much.
I will. It is solidly in Zeta tier though, and the reason for me is the biggest one is it does exactly what you want. You encounter a cool ninja character, you fight him a couple
Oh, he's
times,
so
and then he
great.
joins your team. And it's of course that's what you want. It doesn't
Yeah.
pretend it's not going to do that. You know it's going to happen, and it's great when it happens still. So
I love like the one
I
time
love
you
that
literally have
stuff.
to pay him to join your team for a while, and it's
Hmm.
great 'cause, yeah, he's a ninja.
Yeah.
Shadow rules.
Yep.
So many good characters. Locke, I loved Locke I still
Me
do,
too.
but I was like obsessed with him as a kid. I thought that that was the coolest character I'd ever seen in anything. Loved it. Final Fantasy 7. So this is like the Ocarina of Time, and just like with
Yeah.
Ocarina of Time, I think I'm gonna put it in the second to best tier. And maybe people are gonna get mad at me again. I love Final Fantasy 7. I just don't like it quite as much as my absolute favorites. I think my thing with it is that the second half of the game, it kind of gets away from some of the most interesting aspects, or at least story wise. It brings up earlier about like corporations being bad and the justifications of eco-terrorism
Hmm.
and some of that entries, and then it kind of just becomes, oh, Sephiroth's like an angel devil and we had to stop him from blowing up the world. And which is like, Sephiroth is obviously an iconic and good and memorable villain, but it becomes more, gets more involved.
I mean, he's
uh
no Kefka. Come on.
he's no Kefka, right? I mean, he's obviously a very good villain, but
I
compared
know.
to
Yeah.
Kefka is just a big silly. He's the like Sephiroth is still the second best villain in the franchise, sure, but
Yeah.
he's
My take on Final Fantasy VII, which I've started a bunch of times, never played very much of, um, is that it feels like this split between like that Roger Ebert quote about Air Force One, the Air Force One movie versus Godzilla, where Air Force One, it feels like a slick modern movie that takes itself seriously, and it looks like it has high production value, so you sort of ascribe a certain quality to it, whereas Godzilla is obviously a man in a suit having fun. And as you kind of go through your tastes, you might be like, I want this thing that takes itself seriously and it has that certain sheen to it. And not that Final Fantasy VII is perfecting that, but it just feels like it is drifting toward like we are making a cinematic masterpiece, and that's how we're going to sell it, and that's how we're going to get people on board. And
yeah.
I think it worked, but to me, I liked the silliness of Final Fantasy VI more. And
Yeah,
so
I know
that's
what
why
you
I
mean.
never
And
get into Final Fantasy VII.
there is a
It is
decent
silly.
amount of
It is.
silly, and
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 8 is really going to be your Air Force One movie with that
Yes,
analogy. But this
yes.
is leaning
This
there.
is where it's breaking in that direction, I think, though, or maybe they just learned the wrong lessons from Final Fantasy
Well, I
VII.
mean, I don't know, because yeah, I really don't
For
have
me
much bad to say
personally.
about it. And I am somebody who will be like totally against anybody saying Final Fantasy VII is overrated. It's not. It was a huge deal, and rightfully
Yes.
so. It looks really good. Its use of pre-rendered backgrounds, but like the
Yeah.
real-time characters in front of them, that still looks cool to me today. And it for 1997, that was insanely impressive. The soundtrack is obviously incredible. The materia system is a great magic system. The idea that your magic is leveling up independently of the character that it's equipped to, and you can kind of swap it between the characters, that's really neat. That works really well. And it kind of lets you play with more characters because you don't have to feel as bad as throwing in the new character, because you're like, well, I
Right.
already have this high level fire materia that I can just put on them, and now they know that spell. The summons were obviously some. I remember before it came out, there was like a video on CompuServe or something like that. Maybe it was AOL, of the Leviathan summon, and I just watched that thing, and it was like the resolution was probably like
Yeah.
100 pixels, and I watched it over and over because that was by far the coolest thing I had ever seen.
All that stuff. I mean, when I say that, like they were, trending towards that bombastic, selling as a more serious thing. I guess I mean what I mean is that like they're really playing up the those effects and the summons and the commercial, like selling. It really sold it on the FMVs, and And I was excited about that stuff. It blew me away. I still remember that commercials burned into my brain. I was, over at a friend's house and it came on the TV, and I'm just like, wait, oh my God. I mean, I've heard of this game. Of course, we've heard about this game. It was a big deal. Final Fantasy going from Nintendo to Sony PlayStation. And now finally seeing like a real commercial for it on TV, and it looks cooler than anything else that's happening right now. It looks cooler than any movie. It looks cooler than anything. And I mean, it worked, and it clearly established Final Fantasy as an important franchise for many, many, many years. I guess I'm going to be interested to hear your take about whether or not it has faded with time or not as we get through some of these games. Just the overall take on the series from people, or if it's just there's never been another Final Fantasy VII moment for this series. But so Final Fantasy VII,
there hasn't been.
Okay,
Final
yeah.
Fantasy 7 is Tiraja. So yeah, second best, just because there's just some I like more than it really. But I respect the hell out of it. I still like playing it. And it really was the only time when a Final Fantasy game felt like the most important game in the world, right? There's a lot of other good games, a lot of other hits, but Final Fantasy 7 was definitely a big. I mean, that's why when they remade Final Fantasy 7, it was a big deal, and they poured tons of money into it. And obviously, the remake isn't on the list, but I like that a lot too. So I'd probably, if it was here, I'd probably also put it on Tiraja.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say when we get done, I was gonna have you do that. Okay, Tiraja. Okay,
I'll just say it. Yeah, it would have been Tiraja if it was here.
Yeah, I've played a bunch of that, and I think I agree. Final Fantasy VIII. I think I don't know your opinion on this one at all, so I'm interested. Yeah, I know this is why I'm interested. It is a divisive game. There's some people who love it, and I think there's a lot of people who really don't like it at all. Whereas when we get to a Final Fantasy IX, it seems to be just kind of this like lovable game that people really enjoy. Final Fantasy VIII is divisive. So where do you land?
I like it. I'll tell you right now, it's probably Tiraga for me. I like it. Probably right in the middle. I remember when I was playing it, the first disc, I think it's a 3-disc game, maybe it was 4-disc. I was not getting into it. It is that Air Force One thing. It is taking itself very seriously. Like even just the way the proportions and the characters look, it's much more realistic. It's not very much a silly game. This was clearly the Final Fantasy VII was a big hit. With now the next one, we're gonna maybe try a little too hard. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it was cool. Like this was the best looking console game ever when this came out. It wasn't saying even just the cinematics. I think we all watched that opening cinematic with that song with the choir screaming and the boat going, and it was cool stuff. I think a lot of people have problems with the magic system in this game because it's complicated and it's different. It's kind of like Final Fantasy 2 in that regard, just in terms of being different. But you have to draw magic out of enemies, and then you store them and you can use it later. But you can also junction that magic to your stats, and that's really how you grow your stats. So I think a lot of people, especially if they only play like the first third of the game, end up not liking it because it's hard to understand and to get your head around. And I felt the same way. I don't blame them for it. Well, sticking with it though, once you do understand that system, and you will eventually, you begin to have some fun with it. The story starts getting pretty interesting after disc 1. Also, it then also starts to get dumb again closer to the end. But for a while there, it was a lot of fun. And it is a real, I love low res games like those those super polygon PlayStation aesthetics. Like I'm the guy who's obsessed with Ridge Racer Type 4 right now, and I think that's beautiful. This is another one of like the best looking low poly games. I just kind of dig that vibe and that look to it. So yeah, it's on the card game. Triple Triad. Everyone loves Triple Triad, and for good reason. It's great. It's super fun. So yeah, I think it's flawed, and it's maybe not what I would want from a Final Fantasy in terms of tone. This is one of 7 was the first one that felt pretty sci-fi, and this one is even more in there, but it's a weird tone that they're doing because there's magic still exists and stuff like that. It's not even really sci-fi as much as it is modern. Like the only other one that feels kind of like it is 15. Like 15, you have a car. Right? Yeah. You have a car in this one, right? And so it's weird. But I enjoy its weirdness and I enjoy its ambition. I think it's not quite refined enough to be a higher tier, but I like it. I'm not going to be down on Final Fantasy VIII.
Here's one I know you do like, Final Fantasy IX. I downloaded it. I can tell you that much, Mike.
Oh, good.
I got a bunch of mods for it, is what happened, and I'm like, I need to take the time to actually install these mods and really.
Yeah, the mods. Yeah, mods are good because they release this on everything now. Same thing with 8. And one of the problems is that they like up-res the character models, but not the backgrounds. So you have like
which
these
is
fuzzy backgrounds.
it's really hard to do that. So yeah, the reason they do that, it's very easy to upres the 3D models of the characters, but those are pre-rendered backgrounds, and even if they have the source art was probably rendered at a low resolution. So
Right.
what they waited for now is fans are doing it with computer AI and just AI upscaling, and it
Which is
works
great.
really well, and it looks fantastic. So yeah, now it matches
Yeah.
the high quality character
Right.
models.
That's just my thing. It's like I need consistency one way or the other.
Yes,
Either it
same.
can both look kind of blurry and low res, and that's fine, or
Yes.
it has to all look crisp. So you can do that. I also think like the base version doesn't have analog support for some reason. But anyways, I played the original PlayStation version of it, which I think is great. I think it's the best looking PlayStation 1 game. And yeah, I guess I should just say this is my favorite Final Fantasy. I love Final Fantasy 9. This is, yeah, you can go ahead, put it in Zeta
Yeah.
tier. Just I love it is like back to being that pure fantasy thing, but it's still a little different from everything else. It's more whimsical than a lot of those. It almost feels a bit more fairy tale esque than like this is the only one where the character proportions are very cartoony. Like you have Steiner, who's this knight. He's kind of very beefy and buff. Then you have Vivi, the black mage, and he looks like a kid. And there's like rat people in it, and
Hmm.
that's fun. Yeah, and this is the last of the active time battle ones. The combat feels great. I kind of like the Final Fantasies where each of the characters is just a defined class, except for 4, obviously, which does that. But it's kind of fun. Like here's Vivi, he's a black mage. Like it's a
Hmm.
bit of a problem with 7 and 8. Every character can kind of do everything, like yeah, right. So they kind of feel a little less distinct in that way, and it's a little weird. So I love here. It's like here's Steiner, he's a knight. Here's a summoner. Here's the thief. And it kind of plays into their character stuff. But yeah, this is just such a good looking game. My favorite soundtrack, just full of charm. The story is actually interesting too. It's not just fluff. Like it all revolves around basically characters confronting mortality in fun, interesting ways. Sometimes like not necessarily dark ways, but in like weighty ways. Maybe the only complaint is that it has that JRPG trope where at the end, like the actual final boss is just some like malevolent, easy for me to
Malevolent.
say,
Yeah.
black, like evil force that shows up out of nowhere who wasn't like established, and so
Uh,
there's a bit of a villain problem here. Like it doesn't have its
a
Kefka
Sheev
or even
Palpatine problem, right? Yeah.
it doesn't have its well, his Palpatine's built up the entire time. It would be like although I guess not so much in that new trilogy, huh?
No, not
Yeah.
so much.
Would
That's
it
what I
be
was
like
referring
even
to.
if at the end of Rise of Skywalker there was like a big black blob who's like, I am the Sith Cloud, and now you have to beat me,
Would
something
have
like
made the movie
that.
better. Never mind.
It might have.
Yeah. Yeah. We already put up in set it here, and I remember at the time, even not playing these games when they first came out, being like, "Oh, I don't like how far away they got from Final Fantasy VI or whatever. They should go back and make it more like that." And
Right.
I remember being like, "Oh yeah, Final Fantasy IX looks a lot more like those games. I'm gonna play that instead of trying to be all serious." So I should probably actually play those games, since that's how I felt at the time. Yeah, I know how much you like it, so yeah, it's installed, ready to go.
There you go. It's good
Uh,
stuff.
I guess we're gonna get into the PlayStation 2 games now coming up next. I get real quick up till now. What do you think are there defining characteristics of what makes a Final Fantasy game a Final Fantasy game, and are those going to continue?
Well, so this period right here from 4 to 9 is interesting because they are all very similar because they all have that same battle system, active time battle system. They all have like overworlds. They're all
Hmm.
composed by Nobuo Matsu. This is kind of that golden age, probably 4 from 9. Maybe you can even throw 10 in there. I don't know. But where these games all feel like they're made by the same people each time, and even though they're obviously not connected story wise, there's a good bit connectivity there. Going forward, each game is going to feel drastically different from anything else in the series, and that's where they've been now for a while, and that is nice in its own way. But I did like this era where 4 through 9, they were all kind of riffing on similar ideas, but still managed to feel distinct and different. And obviously, I have like very different opinions about the. Hey, look at the tier list made an F for Final Fantasy. How pretty.
That's well done. Are we going to mess that up next? Probably.
Yeah.
Okay, so for Final Fantasy X, I never found it appealing at all. Just looking at it from the outside, and maybe that might start with Titus, how do you say the character's name?
I always thought it was Titus, but it's Titus. It's the weirdest thing because this is the first voiced one.
Right.
So characters are talking to each other a lot, but they made sure that no one says his name because they wanted him at least for you to put whatever name you wanted, which was
okay.
it's kind of dumb. It's unnecessary.
Yeah.
So yeah, they never say his name in the game, which is bizarre. But I think it's actually Titus because I think in Kingdom Hearts or something they finally say it out loud, or maybe in the Dissidia games, one of them. I don't know. I like Final Fantasy X, actually a good deal. I think even though it's not the active time battle system, it has that kind of like bar battle system where you see where each character is going to have their turn. This is also one of the first RPGs I played where you can just easily swap out party members whenever. So that was nice. And it was very clear, like Waka is good against flying enemies. So you know, if you see a flying enemy, just swap him in real quick and he'll take his turns up there. Remember there was that weird Lord of the Rings RPG for like this era that was just basically an exact copy of Final Fantasy X's battle system. That was bizarre. I'm pretty. This is the probably the next one after 7 that felt the most like spectacle-ish, I guess.
Yes,
right? Like
definitely.
This was a very good looking game. People were kind of freaking out about it. And it was all pretty well deserved.
All of those PlayStation 1 franchises that were getting sequels on PlayStation 2, especially as the PlayStation 2 was blowing up, they were big deals, and this was one of the biggest deals. Absolutely.
It's the Metal Gear Solid 2 or 2 that really come to mind in terms of like the anticipation and people freaking out. Another amazing. I think this is the last like full blown one we get from Nobuo Uematsu. Maybe 12 actually was 2. I forget. But to Xanark Land, everyone knows that. You have a lot of fun, weird things like Blitzball. I like the sphere grid a good amount. The story is actually probably one of the better ones. The voice acting now.
Is this the one with the dress sphere, or is that Final Fantasy X?
That's Final Fantasy X 2, which I started when they got remastered and just I didn't quite get into it for whatever reason. I need to go back and play more of it. I know, but I don't have a strong opinion about 10 2. But I like 10. I think it's Tiraja. I think it's one of the better ones. I think 7 is better than it. That's Tiraga. I wanted one more.
Tiraja. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
It's better than Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 8.
Okay.
It's in the Final Fantasy. I'll put in the Final Fantasy 7 there.
All right. All right. Very good. Okay, so let's really shift gears. I'm like, how much of Final Fantasy 11 did you even play? Final Fantasy 11's MMO.
This is the one I have played the least. Like all the other ones I've beaten, and we get to 14. I played a lot of 14.
Right.
I could not get into 11 very much. I tried a few times. So 11 is an MMO from like pre-World of Warcraft times. So it's almost closer to like an EverQuest. It's very, it's kind of obtuse. It's pretty. If you look at it today, it's incredible how bad the UI is. And it takes up so much of the screen.
And it still is running. Like it's still running, even though there's another Final Fantasy MMO.
They added a little bit of story content not too long ago. When it first launched, this is when I was trying to play it. It was incredibly hard. The new player experience is awful. So I don't doubt that if I put 200 hours into this, I would find it something to like. But I played a good amount of MMOs. I play a lot of Final Fantasy games. I still didn't like this. I had to put this in tier. I don't like Final Fantasy 11. I wish I did. No, I wish I could have gotten into it.
Yeah, and I think it's an acquired taste, but I think a lot of people had the same experience you did, and a lot of people bounced off. I don't remember hearing a lot of fond talk of this game, especially because World of Warcraft did come out, and
right. So a couple years later or so, you get World of Warcraft, and it's just clearly more accessible and fun, and
right.
12 I like quite a lot though. I really like this. This was actually the first one that I beat when I picked up 12. Yeah, so I
started this one a bunch of times, and I like what it's putting down, but I've never stuck with it, and I don't know why. But
yeah, so I played 6 and 7 when they came out, and then I didn't beat them, and then after I beat 12. Like I said, it was shortly after that like 3 came out on DS, and I was like, oh, I can play through all of these, and I'm just some English major in college, so I have the time, and I will, and that's what I did over 6 months, and I had a great time. But so I wasn't expecting to like 12 that much, and it was controversial when it was coming out because this one was going to be very different. Everyone complained that it's like an offline MMO, which is hilarious because now pretty much like so many RPGs play like this does, where you kind of run around and you sort of just target a thing and you start auto attacking it, and you can pick your abilities from there. You can freeze the action, whatever. Like this is how all the Dragon Age games were. So many things are like that. I'm trying to think if I have any real problems with Final Fantasy 12. The story gets the story is very much focused on nations and politics, so much so that sometimes the characters kind of
Fade into the background.
fade into the back, especially uh the quote unquote main character Vaughn, which after later finding out that they added him like later in development because they were afraid that they didn't have like a typical
Mm,
JRPG like young man protagonist. It's like, okay, so they basically just threw Tidus into this one too. And
yeah.
you look at that, and you look at it through that lens, you are kind of like, but the first half of the game, Tidus is fine. Not Tidus, Vaughn. Yeah. But like even then, there's also Penelo, who's just like female Vaughn, and it's she's pretty forgettable. But besides from that, the cast is great. Balthier is one of my absolute favorite Final Fantasy characters.
This is also the most Star Wars one, right? This one feels.
Two is very Star Wars. Also, this one's pretty Star Warsy, sure.
This one's
Especially
like
the opening cinematic, because they almost literally have spaceships. Like
right.
they have like dog fights that remind you of like X-wings versus TIE fighters. Very good looking game. The soundtrack's not quite. The soundtrack's good. It's not quite as good as some of the best ones. You don't have Umatsu at this point. Gosh, I'm not sure. Is this Zeta tier or is this tier Raja? I might put it in Zeta tier just because this was the first one I really beat and loved. And I tell you what, those judges, like that guy in the logo, I love that design. Those guys look so cool to me.
Yes, fantastic art for this game. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love the whole world. It kind of has that sort of meta. I'm really bad with my pronunciations today. What's that sea called? The Mediterranean Sea?
Yeah, Mediterranean. Yeah.
Mediterranean? That doesn't sound right. I'm saying something wrong.
Well, maybe now I feel it's wrong too. The Mediterranean. Let's just
that's it. Mediterranean. I don't know. I have no faith in myself. If you wouldn't have brought up
attention to it, no one would notice. There wouldn't be.
I have no confidence. That sea by Italy and France. It reminds me of that.
I mean, and this is going smooth. No one's gonna notice that we can't say that word, right, Mike? I think we're all good.
They were going. I'm gonna make sure. This is why we're not winning awards for best game journalist.
Exactly. Good games writing. Yeah, I don't know. All right. So we just did Final Fantasy 12. So
that's
Final
busy Zeta tier, but that's okay because Final Fantasy 13 is next. It's going to balance.
I mean, this is one of the most well-regarded franchises of all time, right? Shouldn't it?
Yeah, and it's also one of my favorite franchises. Obviously, I like a lot of its games.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That's why we're doing this.
Yes.
So 13. I know this is another divisive game. Here are some of the things I know about this game. Lightning. A lot of the developer really likes lightning.
Lightning is such a
yeah, and then I also know you got to play it for 30 hours before it gets good. And is that okay? Is that not okay? How can we ask people to take much time? Let's have a long conversation about this for years and years and years, and that conversation will keep coming up forever, and no one will ever stop having that conversation. That's what I know about Final Fantasy 13, Mike. So what is your take?
I am a bit of a Final Fantasy 13 defender, but even still, it's not one of the better ones. I think I defend it because the combat system is neat. Honestly, it's been so long I couldn't even describe it well, but I liked it. It felt different. It felt like a pretty neat balance between like the old school ATB system, but being a bit more, I guess, action oriented. It was a good looking game, but yeah, man, they really wanted you to think that Lightning was the coolest character in the world. And when she's not, it just kind of, it's awkward, right? Then the rest of the cast is also not all that good. You have an annoying
What's wrong with her? What's wrong with her?
With Lightning?
Yeah, I don't know. That's all I know is she exists and that she's on the cover of the other games.
Yeah, she's just too cool. Like, she's just there to be cool. Like it's it's just one of the things with the game telling you how cool this character is, and they're badass and they're awesome, and I mean, look, in most Final Fantasy games, the main character is never the best one, right? But the problem here is, it felt like they were really pushing Lightning. They were pushing Lightning very hard. I mean, she was in Louis Vuitton commercials,
right? Yeah,
it was weird just how much they thought that Lightning was going to be the greatest thing ever. And then when she wasn't, it just felt kind of awkward. So the game has a very slow beginning. Maybe not 30 hours before like the game really gets going, but it's a pretty long tutorial situation before basically it opens up the kind of role system where you can assign like a character to be a tank or to be a healer or DPS, that kind of thing. And once it does, it gets more fun. Also it is very linear. 10 is linear also, and it doesn't get nearly as much flack for it. So I always kind of defend it in
Right.
that aspect.
That sort of thing happens though. Like we see games and movies and media have similar aspects, similar things that people complain about, but they pick up on them more when they don't like the overall package. And I think that just comes down to like insufficient media criticism, where we are noticing things we don't like about this, and so the things we pick up on are like the cinema sin stuff. Oh, there's a plot hole or whatever, or it's linear. But yeah, that is, I mean, it's absolutely the thing I heard. One of the most things about this is like, it's just a straight corridor you go down. And I think someone might have called it like press X to win, and you just keep pressing X through the menu to win. Maybe that's not right, but
Maybe that seems that is maybe a bit much. I will say that there's an evil Pope is the main bad guy, and man, is he maybe the worst Final Fantasy villain. He's just very forgettable. He's an evil Pope, and I tell you what,
a lot of Pope punching or evil popes, through this period of gaming.
Assassin's Creed at this time.
Just straight up punching them.
We were fighting a lot of popes. I think maybe this was when those scandals were going on. Everybody just wanted to,
or like right when we were first like discovering it. Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to punch the Pope, I guess. And
I get it.
Our current one with that Benedict guy, he had a punchable face.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
I am Roman Catholic. I shouldn't say that.
I'm letting you say it because you're Catholic. So I'm like, all right, I don't have to say anything. He's
still
saying
alive,
it.
Right?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. I mean, I just watched that movie, The Two Popes, and
Oh, is that good?
It's all right. It's like very much a TV movie. Where
I think I could go for a TV movie. Where it's just mostly people talking.
Mostly people talking, and the conversations are good, and the actors are great. Yes, it's a good movie. Yeah, watch it.
Okay, all right. So yeah, Final Fantasy 13's Tira. It's not awful. If you like Final Fantasy, I think you're still going to enjoy playing through it. Like some people are like, well, don't even play this one. Like if you're gonna play through all of them, I think there are worse Final Fantasies than this. Does have some issues, though. There's clearly things they could have done better. And I think they wanted this to be Final Fantasy X so badly. I think they wanted it to be a Final Fantasy VII so badly. And it's not
right. That. Yeah. I mean, and this is when development was changing for everyone, but especially Japanese developers. And I think this is like when you hear stuff like Japanese developers are kind of having a hard time keeping up with HD consoles. They're not sure how to handle that stuff. And eventually they got really, really, really good at it. But this was like, there were some growing pains through this period where Final Fantasy 13 took a long time to come out. And this is a console generation where they had only one of these sort of core, not MMO. I mean, this game had its sequels for sure, but it did the Final Fantasy 15. That was the next generation of consoles. So
Final Fantasy 15 was supposed to also be a PlayStation 3 thing.
Right, and I think Final Fantasy 15 started as like like Final Fantasy 13 Versus or whatever. I think that's what it started as.
Yeah, so. It was. And I still feel like, Final Fantasy 13 2 and then Lightning Returns happened because they spent so much money making that engine and stuff's like, okay, we can't just make one of these after that investment.
I think that's exactly what I think. This is when they're discovering they kind of have to do that to get their money back. So things are changing and they're figuring it out. And I think eventually they come out on the other side, I think, but this was a rough period for them in terms of development.
And I did not play 13.2 or Lightning Returns. And I'm sure at some point there's going to be a package with them and maybe I'll explore them then. Right. But right now I have not. I know that 13 is one of the games that actually got one of like the most interesting backwards compatibility bumps.
Yeah. It runs really well on Xbox. Yeah.
So it might be worth seeing, but yeah.
Final Fantasy 14. What do you think?
So first off, I did not play that original awful version of this. That almost certainly would have been in tier. But then they remade it, spent all that time and money, and it turned out being great. And then the expansions are even better. Super fun MMO. It's a great MMO that you can actually just enjoy playing by yourself or with friends. Like when you're leveling up, there's a lot of story content that you're supposed to just do by yourself, but the dungeons are still fun to do with friends. Then when you're max level, there's the raids and stuff. Very well structured MMO. Does a very good job of being story focused and making your character actually feel like he's a part of the story. I love how your character can be any of the classes or jobs. You can just kind of switch between them, so you don't really need alts that much, which makes fun. A beautiful world, really, really nice capital cities with really cool music. Yeah, this is Tier Raja for me. Again, it's not quite. I'm not going to put it up there with some of my favorites ever, but this is a great.
The one question
MMO.
I have about Final Fantasy 14 for you is, I mean, and you mentioned it's like it has a really good story, but I hear it's like one of the best Final Fantasy stories you can get. Period. Is that how you feel about it, or is it like pretty good?
No, I do. So especially like the Heaven's Ward expansion, which was the first expansion for A Realm Reborn. That's like maybe my favorite Final Fantasy story. That was
Okay.
great.
Hmm.
And it is overarching. And that next expansion, Endwalker, is going to end this main story, which is great, by the way, that they're
Yeah,
doing
neat.
that. Because like in World of Warcraft right now, it does feel just like like the world is too eventful, and it has been for like what
Right.
15 years now. And it's like, can we have some kind of like, I don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
resolution and like
It's
a
like, oh,
next thing.
all the bad people always seem to come from the Skywalker family. Why does that keep
Yeah.
happening over and over?
So,
Yeah,
and they said there's going to be like there's going to be more story, but it's going to be like a new chapter. So I love that there will be an ending of sorts to this.
yeah. That's
But
to me. That seems like a development team that has a lot of confidence in the way that they're doing that game. So yeah,
yeah, all the jobs and classes are so much fun to play. I play as a black mage, and I played all of the casting classes in World of Warcraft, and I love my black mage more than any of them. It's this really
wow.
fun
Okay,
mechanic of like you have your fire spells and they cost mana, but they're really strong. But you run out of mana. But then you have your ice spells, which are weaker. But while you're casting ice spells, you regenerate mana, and that's like the basis of it. And you're kind of dancing between these two forms. They also have lightning magic, which is like your damage over time spells, and it gets nicely more and more, just a little bit more complex as you go through it. Oh, it's great. The progression is so much fun. Yeah, I love Final Fantasy 14. It's almost Zeta tier, but I'm going to keep it off there. Just, ultimately, when I'm playing Final Fantasy, I do prefer a single player
sure,
RPG, which
right.
is what it is. If this was an MMO tier list, it would be in the top tier.
Final Fantasy 15, and I don't think this one is. I wouldn't necessarily call it divisive, but I feel like there's people that really could take it. People that love it, and I think there's people that could take it or leave it. It's kind of my impression.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are going to agree with me and putting it kind of middle of the pack.
Right.
I
Okay.
like it's like those. I like Final Fantasy 15. It has issues, not as many as a Final Fantasy 13 does, and I think its story is better, its characters are better, it's a more satisfying experience overall. The open world stuff works pretty well. It's also clearly a game that had a troubled development as you played it. Like there are just things that are weird, like one
Yeah.
point where a major story beat happens and it basically shows cutscenes from that movie that they released, and that's bizarre. The last third of the game, you could just feel that they wanted to have a lot more there, and then there wasn't, and they literally patched some of that stuff in later.
Right.
Like I remember at the end, you find out that spoilers, you find out one of your party members was a robot the whole time,
Oh,
and
incredible.
I tell you what, they bring that up, and it does not matter, and it doesn't factor. It's clearly just something that they decided at one point, and it probably was a bigger deal at some version of the game.
Right. It's
And they
probably like
probably should have
they
just
probably cut out a
not.
bunch of stuff that like was important to that, and then but at a certain point they're like, oh well, if we do cut out all of it, maybe this one other thing won't work or something like that. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I guess yeah, I'm sure they had a conversation. Is this character still a robot? I know we thought that was cool. It doesn't seem very important. And there's a bunch of things like that. Like there's some characters that show up for whatever reasons, and the characters seem way too well developed. And you're like, I bet at a different version of this game, this character was much more important.
Hmm.
Stuff like that. But it is still fun. Some like fighting some of the really big monsters is great. I like the combat system. It does a good job of being like an action RPG that still feels more methodical. It doesn't feel like Kingdom Hearts, It still feels a bit Final Fantasy-ish. So yeah, it's middle of the tier. It's in Tier Raga. It's there with like Final Fantasy 8, Final Fantasy 1.
All right, excellent. Okay, before I have you go over this list, just a couple of questions about some other Square Enix stuff. So, where does Chrono Trigger go?
Oh, Chrono Trigger would be Zeta tier. Chrono Trigger's
Okay.
great.
Did you play Vagrant Story?
Only a little bit, and I didn't get far into it. I've downloaded it onto my PlayStation Classic, so it's on the to-do list. But yeah, because I like 12 so much, and it's like the same people.
The Kingdom Hearts games. I don't know. Pick
Oh
one.
God,
Where do they go?
that's gonna be no, because that can
That's
do
its
that
own.
tier list.
That's its own.
There's
Okay.
enough games. There's enough
No,
games.
absolutely, there are. Yeah, we have to include the mobile games if we do that, though, Mike. I'm going to force
Oh,
you
that
to.
game's going on. I haven't played much of that. I might have to.
You have to play that before we do this.
Great.
I'm trying to think if there's any other things that we should do.
I will say I haven't.
Oh, Tactics.
I played
Yeah.
Tactics. I haven't played enough of it. It's obviously very good. Everyone loves it. I need to play it more. I played more of Tactics Advance, which I liked. it was missing a bit of gravitas for me. I don't
Yeah,
know why I felt that
I
way.
love Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. But yeah, it's definitely just sort of a lighthearted thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's almost forgettable, almost. And I think that War of the Lions and Final Fantasy Tactics, people they love the gameplay, but they also really like all of the Final Fantasy
right. The
accoutrement.
character,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. There's some weightiness to that that isn't in the one where a bunch of kids go through a storybook.
yeah. But combat's great in the and like
Yeah,
it wasn't overall, which is like what I really wanted on the mobile version or the Game Boy Advance version that I was playing. So it totally worked for me.
there's a
Um,
ton of spin-offs. Like the City, the PSP ones I thought were good. That console one was bad and
the City is the
disappointing.
fighting game,
Games, yeah, it's too complicated. It's
right?
bizarre. It's not unnecessarily complicated. It should have just been more like, I don't know, make a Tekken with Final Fantasy characters or make a Smash Bros. With Final Fantasy characters. They're almost too ambitious with it, and it's
Right.
weird. Uh,
Last thing,
I
and then go
a
ahead.
lot. Go ahead. Theater Rhythm's good also, but what do you think?
Right, I was gonna say okay. So and then what are your hopes for Final Fantasy 16?
Oh man,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm already pretty excited. I think what they're showing looks good. I like that. It feels a bit more gothic than we're used to, which I think is a fun direction.
it feels informed by Game of Thrones for sure.
It does, and I'm not a giant Game of Thrones fan, so and I hope it
Well,
doesn't
yeah,
get
but
like,
it
real
just feels
dark.
informed
I'm
like
being
the way the
informed by
Star
it.
Wars has informed these games. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I think it's good to take inspiration from a bit of a different source.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess I hope that it all feels a bit more cohesive than say Final Fantasy 15 or 13 did. There's been I liked those games. There's been just a little something missing. So
Well,
I
and I
hope
think Final Fantasy VII remake I think is evidence that they have sort of figured out their shit, for a lack
I
of a
think
better
so.
term. They feel like they are in a good spot with making video games again, and
Right.
that's exciting.
And the Final Fantasy 14 team is super involved in this, and they seem extremely competent right now. And it's funny how it's almost encouraging how that the first trailer looks good, but it wasn't a Final Fantasy 13 situation where they seemed like they were trying to make the best and prettiest game ever. Like I was
Mhm.
almost happy about it.
Right,
Like
yeah,
good,
and,
just make a game.
no, and maybe I mean maybe that's where these games should have been this entire time, because yes, Final Fantasy VII was the biggest game in the world at the time, and now I think these games come out and they have their audience, and it's a really dedicated and sizable audience. But games like Far Cry sell more than the Final Fantasy games. I think all of the Ubisoft open world games sell better than these games. And it's like at a certain point, maybe just make the best single player RPG you can make with a pretty decent budget. Expect to sell 5 and then maybe on the higher end to 10 million copies. And if it breaks out of there, that's fantastic. But I think if you aim for that sort of
Yeah.
budget range, you'll make the games faster. You could focus on what's important, what these fans really care about. And to me, like the response when I'm seeing from Final Fantasy 16 is this is exactly what people want. Maybe some people were complaining about the visuals, I guess, but most people just seem very happy that they're getting into their Final Fantasies already. Is kind of how people are putting it. So
Yeah, relatively already, right? I mean,
yeah,
it is. I mean, gosh, Final Fantasy 13 feels like forever ago because it kind of was, and that
right,
was the second last single player Final Fantasy we've had.
right. But
Yeah,
but
so
I guess if you count remake in there, it's like almost like okay, almost already.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, if remake, if that would almost be the one I would want to include the most, that or tend to. But if I did, remake would be in tier Russia. I like it a lot.
All right, Mike, give me the list.
All right, in Zeta tier, Final Fantasy 5, Final Fantasy 6, Final Fantasy 9, and Final Fantasy 12. Very personal list up there. I feel like most people would agree with 6, maybe agree with 9. I feel like 12 and 5 more people would have maybe on Terraja or
Yeah, I'll be
lower.
interested to see how people react in the comments.
The only tier list that people have been that we've had a sizable amount of people get mad is the Mass Effect one because I think some Mass Effect fans independently found it.
Yeah.
They
Yes. Yeah.
got mad, which is great. I love it.
Yeah.
To be fair, there was one character we thought was gay who wasn't.
Yeah. We just messed up, and yeah, I mean it's gonna happen.
Yeah. A tier Raja, Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 10, Final Fantasy 14. In tier Raga, not Ja.
Right. Yeah, I read it as Tiraja. I did.
We have Final Fantasy, the original, Final Fantasy 8, Final Fantasy 15. In Tira, we have Final Fantasy. What is that? 2? Yeah, 2. Final
I think
Fantasy
so.
4,
Yeah.
Final Fantasy. Yeah, it is too. Final Fantasy 4, Final Fantasy 13, and in tier, just plain old tier, we have Final Fantasy 3 and Final Fantasy 11.
Oh yeah, no, this is a good list. I mean, I am definitely gonna play Final Fantasy 9, and if I have a good time, maybe I'll start looking at some of these other Zeta tier games that I haven't played. You know what? I did forget one other Square Enix game that we should probably put on this. Balan Wonderworld. Where's it go?
Oh no! Yeah, people need to see that video too.
Yeah,
There's a new one. That's That's just Ty.
yeah, yeah, exactly. The Quiet Man. Yeah, down there with the Quiet Man. We did a video where I played Balan Wonderworld and Mike watched me. So if you want to watch that, that's on the channel as well. All right, let's get out of here.
I almost want to do a tier list just on the logos now because I love the motif of like there's a thing with a color gradient.
Yeah, I mean it all looks really good. They should never ever stop doing that. Yeah, it's
just like the logo. What the logo for 16 I loved because back before Final Fantasy 15 came out, I made a fake Final Fantasy 15 logo and I used a phoenix as like the main motif. So seeing Final Fantasy 16 use a phoenix as its logo motif, like it tickled my fancy a bit.
You should sue. You should sue. All right, everybody, we're gonna get out of here. We actually the PlayStation State of Plays happening today when we're recording this, so we're gonna go get ready for that. Thank you for watching. We're going to get out of here. Until next time, have a good one. Take care of yourself, and goodbye.
Bye. Play Final Fantasy.